Welcome back to the Zeitcast, friends. My name is Jonathan Martin, and I wish we were face to face in person, but we are face to face via screen. Will James is one of my absolute favorite people, one of my dearest friends. And the way this came about, brothers and sisters, that because Brother Will James, he could be anywhere in the world right now doing anything. But I called him up and I said, Will, the people need a word from the Lord. I need a godly man. I need a righteous man to bring a word from God to the people of God. And even though he's a husband, a father, and all the things, I said, I know you could be eating with your family, brother, but the people out there need some spiritual food. And Brother Will has come to bring the manna. He's here to bring the word tonight. Welcome, Will James.
Thank you. Thank you.
So good to see you.
You too. Sorry you could not find that man of God you were looking for. I will fill in.
I'm so happy to see you, my friend. You made me laugh with your text today that in my little riff on Revelation that lawyers were catching strays.
Yeah, I get it. I didn't know Schofield was a lawyer. I didn't put two and two together. But I knew what you were getting at. I get it.
Yeah. I didn't mean you.
Well, there was a time. There was a time I would have used it very similarly. So
now, see, I don't want to get too far off the deep end too early, but one of the things I know that we want to talk about is that because I'm always fascinated by people's stories of finding faith, losing faith, reintegrating faith, whatever that looks like. Will's world is very different from mine in terms of the Seventh-Day Adventist tradition that I still feel like I would know relatively little about. I know we've shared this story before, but it's been a really long time for folks. So it's fascinating to me because, I guess when we were doing the table in OKC, you heard me on Pete Inn's podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, the Bible for Normal People. You were promoting Shipwrecked, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
And so you guys were talking about the book, and I love Pete. I love that podcast. It was like the thing I would go back to and listen several times every episode. And you guys were talking, and I was like, man, my wife and I have been looking for just any kind of community that is like what they're talking about. I wish there'd be something like that in Oklahoma. There will never be anything like that in Oklahoma. And then Pete asked you where you were, and you started talking about Tulsa, and then that the table was meeting in the OKC Improv in the Plaza at the time, which Dee and I were there probably twice a week in the Plaza anyway, and so I finished the podcast, bought Shipwrecked on Kindle.
Wow.
And read it at the gym. Like I was running a 5K every day at the time. And so I set it on the treadmill and read the whole book in like 3 or 4 days on the treadmill, and then went to the table that weekend to see if it was, because we were at a place where I couldn't leave a church service happy. I would, or I shouldn't say a church service. I couldn't get through a sermon and remain happy, or I was either angry at a doctrinal thing or just an image of Jesus being reflected in some way that I didn't agree with, or we would leave as spiritually hungry as we got there. And that service, I didn't bring the kids, I didn't bring Dee, because I was like, I'm not going to drag you to another thing, and I walked out of there and immediately called Deanna and was like, I'm not mad about anything. Like everything happened, and I sat there waiting for the thing, and it never happened. And so then we've been friends ever since. I crashed y'all's Christmas party, I think, like the next month. Yeah. At wherever that was. It's the Scottish Arms in St. Louis.
But it's like a Scottish themed pub.
Yeah. And so ever since then, man, you've been one of the best friends.
No, it's like we have done, and we've had so many adventures ever since. I mean, it just feels like, I mean, I feel like I've known you forever. I've been, I mean, we talk about this stuff a lot, but I never stop being fascinated because, like since about that point in my life, I'd already been around a lot of evangelical, Pentecostal, charismatic folks who were in some process of deconstruction, some sort of, disillusionment, disenchantment, like whatever. I really didn't know. Like, I didn't know that there was an equivalent to that happening with anyone uh, in the world that you came from, because that was so unfamiliar to me. So that's part of what's been interesting, is that in some ways those worlds are very different, and yet it feels like there's so many points of convergence and so many things I find to be the same about these kinds of stories. Like for
Uh-oh.
people like us, I mean, for me too. Like this sort of, yeah. I just it's just I'm always so interested in kind of the continuity and discontinuity of those things. Did you grow up within the tradition, or I don't know that if your parents came to it like later in life.
They came to it when I was one. I was a baby,
Okay.
so I
Okay.
don't remember anything else.
Okay.
But there was an evangelist named Oscar Lane,
Mm.
um, and he had a series of tapes on Revelation. Um,
Ah.
and my mom worked at a hospital, and there was a doctor there that was a third generation Adventist, and she got a set of those tapes of Oscar's
Okay.
tapes and gave them to my mom. So my mom listened to them, gave them to my dad, and my dad was like completely dismissive of it.
Mm.
So then my mother gave them, just started giving them to friends. She started making
Mm.
mass copies of them and passing them out to her friends. And by the time, so she starts going to the local Adventist church. My dad is still going to, I guess, a Baptist church. I honestly forget what they were before. Because I know there's a lot of Kojics on my dad's side, but I
Yeah.
think he's
Okay.
Baptist. I think he was Baptist. And by the time she convinced him to come back, she had brought 32 people with her.
Wow.
And I mean, they all got baptized together. Like this group of 33 people off of just these tapes, having never even met Oscar yet,
Mm.
um, were all convinced of that particular articulation of Revelation, and
Mm.
which is way in the weeds. But uh, so yeah, that won them over, and then that was my whole experience until almost exactly the same time,
Mm.
where we had small children and also started making some of those same uh, like mental journeys of
Yeah.
how do we start to share this life with our children. How do we teach it to them? And that was really the first time I had to analyze it from a what to do with it standpoint, as
Mm.
opposed to just reinforcing what I believed.
Mm.
So it wasn't, the exercise was different. It was translating it to, trim a little bit of the negative sides that I got.
Yeah.
Um, which is not to, I don't want to like immediately say Adventism is negative,
Sure.
but people's personalities react to different types of theologies differently.
Yeah.
And being as naturally anxious and
Mm.
as much of an overthinker I was,
Mm.
having such a defined list of do's and don'ts and
Yeah.
how to do them properly, the list wasn't hard,
Yeah.
you know, but it was, uh, there were all of these like sacrifices of personality, I think,
Mm.
is how I would kind of frame it, that I was doing to be able to fit the mold
Mm.
that as an adult I didn't really think were necessary. And so it was like, well, how do you teach? Because no one told me to necessarily do that. It was how I learned it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, if I give it to my kids the exact way it was given to me, they're going to make those same assumptions or leaps, or they're
Mm-hmm.
going to have these same questions and knots to untie later. So if I can untie them first
Mm-hmm.
and give them something, a version of it that's cleaner, I'll save them a lot of headache, you know. And then in so doing, I learned more about Adventism than I expected to, and more about how the interpretive choices were made, um, what the other options were. Like the it's a magical story if Adventists tell you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a pragmatic story if you just kind of think about it.
Mm.
Which is not to say that they're different stories,
Sure.
but there are reasons that the Adventism became that lo- lost a little bit of value to me
Mm.
as I learned more about what the Bible was.
Mm.
Because I think that I know I'm kind of bouncing around,
No, it's great.
but it was like realizing what I had was an interpretation,
Uh,
not
okay.
the black and white truth. It
Yeah.
was, here is what a group of people have decided is how you read, not even the whole Bible, we would say it was, but these very specific pieces and
Mm.
this map to get to where we needed to get to justify our denomination's existence
Yeah.
in the thousands that are. And so when you learn, or you take a more critical scholar look to how the text was put together,
Mm.
reading it in those secret coordinate ways
Mm.
becomes less of a valid way of looking at things. Because how
Yeah.
could you? It changes the way you think of inspiration, I think,
Mm.
to look at how the Bible came together.
Sure.
And once that image of inspiration changes, you're then left with, in Adventism, the vision of inspiration that exists in Ellen White,
Mm.
the messenger, the prophet from the foundation of the denomination. And now how she's inspired is elevated above how a lot of the Bible would have been inspired.
Mm. Wow.
Because now you have evidence of, oh, well, this is a pre-existing text that's put inside here, and here are two
Mm.
stories and two narratives that have been weaved together that,
Mm.
over time, potentially, I'm
Yeah.
not trying to take anyone's infallible Bible from them. I'm just saying there are these evidences that the text is weaved together in a way that a guy sitting down and writing from top to bottom, it's just not there. It's not the
Yeah.
way to look at it. And that has created, because this is kind of the thing I've been dealing with right now, is the question I get on this side the most is, what is truth then?
Mm.
If it's not what we have, who has it and what is
Yeah.
it? And I've been trying to find the best way to break that question down, because the pursuit is flawed in my
Mm.
opinion.
Mm.
And so I've been drawing this analogy in my brain of The Matrix, because it's one of
Mm.
my favorite film series. But the idea of, there is this system that for some people, they're just wired in a way that they see an inherent flaw in that system, and it doesn't work for them. And
Yeah.
those were the people that were woken up in The Matrix.
Sure.
everyone else that wasn't is because the system worked for them.
Yeah.
But once you're out of it, you can go back in, you can
Mm.
experience the matrix again, but
Mm.
you can't explain to them what it's like to be back in the real world, for lack of
Wow.
a better term. And so when they're
Yeah.
saying, if this isn't true, if this isn't everything, then which other denomination
Mm.
has it? And that's not every denomination's path. That's not everyone's goal.
No.
And
No.
that was, again, going back to just how we met, um, that there wasn't a, hey, here is the list of things we believe. Here's the right way to read everything. It was just, we are people that have a sense of something more.
Yeah.
We have common language we can share to speak about that, but we aren't. There's no creed. There is no um, request to disbelieve reality.
Mm.
Um, you could just be there. You could come to the table and be fed.
Mm.
And that beauty I didn't know existed. Like that
Mm.
idea of like, oh, I don't need to know everything. I don't need to have this in my hand. It was freeing to me, but it's scary to a lot of other people. Like it's
Sure.
hard to put Adventism down if you're not going to pick something else back up.
Yeah.
And it's tough. It's tough because for me to do it, I had to dismantle almost everything Adventism believes,
Mm.
just for my
Mm.
own sense
Yeah.
of um, comfort and satisfaction. Of I looked into this. I looked into it.
So, question, Will. I mean, one, I love the way you talk about describing yourself as being a little more anxious and also taking all this very seriously and focused, because I think our personalities, because that's very much how I felt like within my world. I feel like there's some people who get all the fire and brimstone, eternal conscious torment, and end time stuff, and seem to turn out more or less fine. Others of us, because I know I was that way. It's kind of like, well, if this is true, then it's irresponsible to not think about it all the time. You're wicked to take a vacation from like how what like I mean, the stakes are so high then. So like I feel like I was obsessive about all those things, and I really want to ask that, especially since just before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about the little Revelation riff I did the other day, and you mentioned teaching on Revelation out of the gate with this. So in Adventism, is it the same kind of dispensational theology you get in evangelicalism, 7-year tribulation, a rapture, like all that? Is it like Schofield and all that, or is it its own thing? Because I know a lot of things in Adventism are kind of, from my perspective, seem to be kind of their own thing.
They've definitely taken Schofield's. Oh wow, they've taken that idea of the seven churches
Okay.
being the Christian church through 7 different periods, not literal
Okay.
churches.
Yeah. Okay.
But there's no rapture
Mm.
story. That whole ending is a little bit different in Adventism. But what Adventism does with Revelation, to me, in my opinion, is it. And this is what I really loved about what you were saying, because you pointed out that the book starts off by pointing out, hi, this is a revelation of Jesus.
Mm.
This is an explanation, an unveiling of Jesus. And I feel as though Adventism uses Revelation as evidence of its own existence being preordained. Like
Interesting.
it is
Okay,
not the
so it fits
revelation.
into this prophetic scheme.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
not the revelation of Jesus so much
Ah.
as it's the revelation of what the world looks like at the end.
Mm.
But, so it reveals who the beast is, who
Mm.
Babylon is, who the woman is, who the remnant of her seed is,
Mm.
the mark, the seal, the dragon. But, and all of it is very, very specific. It's all very time specific. Like, the big thing is, this is really specific, but Revelation 12:17
Yeah.
Defines, in Adventism's view, defines the Adventist church.
Wow.
And it
Interesting.
is, John is predicting the birth of Seventh-Day Adventism. And so, and it's a long, convoluted way of getting there. But
Mm.
he's talking about the remnant. The dragon is wroth with the woman and seeks to make war with the remnant of her seed.
Yeah.
They that keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. I think I'm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And the NRSV, it's then the dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. So is
Yeah.
the idea that we are the people then who
So
keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus?
Adventism is saying the woman is Christianity.
Oh, interesting.
The remainder of her seed are the people at the end who are keeping the commandments of God and have the
Ah.
testimony of Jesus. And that
Mm.
only describes Seventh-day Adventists to Seventh-day
Fascinating.
Adventists. And the way
Okay.
that is, because you
Wow.
could easily read that as these are they that keep the commandments of God.
Mm-hmm.
So Israel,
Yeah.
but also have the testimony of Jesus, who
Mm.
proclaim Jesus as Messiah. So Christianity, followers of Jesus, not Christianity, let me rephrase. Followers of Jesus would fit that scale, that
Mm.
description. But in Adventism, what they do is they say, well, all the other Christian churches are attempting to keep 9 commandments.
Ah, okay. And this is great because I feel like what we do with that one commandment is so crucial in terms of like people just understand the premise of. I'm so glad you're going here. Please say
Yeah.
more. This is great.
So everyone else is keeping 9,
Yeah.
and they are not actually even trying to keep the 4th commandment being the 10th one.
Mm.
And so Adventism, from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, sets that 24 hours aside as a
Yeah.
complete holy day. No working, no buying, no selling, no, everything has to be Christ centered, all of your
Mm.
activities. And because we're doing that, or attempting
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
the fact that other churches meet on Sunday
Mm.
doesn't fit, because they're not spending the whole day.
Mm.
Most of them. A lot of them do. I had my grandparents wouldn't turn the TV on Sunday.
Yeah.
So some people do, but it's that idea of people are going to church on the wrong day, and
Mm-hmm.
they are keeping the day wrong.
Mm.
Adventists are one of few denominations that are attempting to keep the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Now, what I've always found very interesting about that is you could be a celibate nun on a life mission who feeds the hungry, gives money to the poor, clothes the naked,
Mm.
Sunday through Friday. And the thing you do is you have a bowling league at
Mm.
1:30 Saturday afternoon. I'm an Adventist. I keep the Sabbath.
Yeah.
I might cheat on my wife. I might
Mm.
lie. I might covet. I might break all the other 9.
Mm.
But I'm attempting to keep that 10th one. And so we're all failing at keeping them. But for some reason, we're still the only ones that are keeping the law, even though none of us are keeping the law. But we've,
And is there a sense that that commandment is elevated above the others in that way? That's the most important one to keep?
well, you're not supposed to say it, but yeah.
Mm,
I mean, like you're
mm.
supposed to deny that and say, no, it's not more important. It's the one that's been the only one he told us to remember is the
Okay.
only one that's being forgotten.
Wow. Yeah, I see.
And so that's the first half. The second half
Hmm.
of the testimony of Jesus. This is gonna, this is gonna, this is a interesting thing.
I love it.
The testimony of Jesus is the writing and life of Ellen White.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Now
Okay.
I'll tell you how you get there, because people, Adventists, don't like to hear it, even though we
Uh,
say it. It's literally like you can go on an Adventist website; it will tell you that.
hmm.
But so here's how you get there. Revelation 12:17. These are they that keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. The church says, well, what is the testimony of Jesus?
Hmm.
So they look to, instead of analyzing any verse that would reference the testimony of Jesus or testimony about Jesus, whatever, they reference just one. And it's
Hmm.
Revelation 19:10.
Okay.
And it says that the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
So then the church asks the question, what is the spirit of prophecy?
Mm.
The spirit of prophecy is a phrase that does not appear anywhere else in the Bible
That's
other
right.
than Revelation 19:10.
Yep. Yep.
So the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus, because that's what that verse says.
Mm.
So if you wanted to know what the spirit of prophecy is, you should then look at the other verses that say, what is the testimony of Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
That is not what Adventism does. It
Mm.
says, well, the spirit of prophecy is not mentioned again.
Mm.
However, in 1 Corinthians 8, I want to say, is the list of the gifts of the Spirit.
Yeah.
One of the gifts of the Spirit is prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
So the gift of prophecy must be the spirit of prophecy.
Mm. Okay.
So then, in looking at the beasts and churches and everything else in
Yeah.
Revelation and Daniel, I won't bore you with all of that. But there is a series of prophecies that suggest whoever John is talking about in Revelations, what the first one I said, 12,
Mm-hmm.
that group can't arise until after 1798.
Yeah.
There's a
Wow.
whole
Okay.
like Napoleon and the Pope thing, like there's a whole thing.
Huh.
And there was a prophecy of the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and that was supposed to be the end of the world,
Wow.
all in 1798, which didn't happen. The Ottoman Empire didn't fall. But Adventists kept the idea that it did, even though,
Mm.
you can go to Turkey right now. But uh, this idea was this group can't arise until after 1798. So every
Okay.
Christian denomination that existed already by 1798 could not be the remnant of her seed.
Mm. Okay.
And so then you needed the gift of prophecy
Yeah.
after 1798. And
Yeah.
we so happen to have a prophet that pops up in
Mm.
1844.
Mm.
And so because God spoke through her, there was a people keeping the fourth commandment
Okay.
with the gift of prophecy, being the spirit of prophecy, being the testimony of Jesus.
Mm.
And so, like in the fundamental beliefs about the spirit of prophecy, it says we believe that the gift of prophecy was manifested in the life and writings of Ellen White. It is
Mm.
a it is required belief. You don't have
Mm.
to like swear to it to get baptized or anything, but it is very much integral part of the system because it's the second half of Revelation 12:17.
Okay. Yeah.
And so if the testimony of Jesus means anything other than the gift of prophecy as manifested through Ellen, then
Mm.
Adventism is incorrect about how it's reading Revelation.
I see.
So it can never give up its
Mm.
belief in Ellen. Whether you are, and this
Mm.
is a thing that happens with Adventism, is many Adventists will not read Ellen White, will not quote Ellen White, don't like to read or talk about Ellen White,
Really?
but will never say she was not an inspired prophet. Because
Mm.
you have to believe she's inspired, whether you
Okay.
find her words valuable to you or not, because it's
Wow.
the identity. It's our
Mm.
literal, predicted by John identity in
So
Revelation.
what is people's discomfort with her within the tradition? Why would there be people who wouldn't not want to appeal directly to?
So, well, first off, you have to believe, if you think about it, that God spoke to her more
Uh,
than everyone else combined.
mm.
The volume that she wrote of things she said God showed her is larger than any single biblical author's contribution to the canon
Mm.
by far. I mean, she's got
Mm.
100,000 pages of manuscripts,
Wow.
and a lot of that is reused. It might
Okay.
be 75,000, but still.
Still.
And so and for 70 years, he was visiting her in dreams,
Mm.
taking her, uh, like whisking her off to heaven, to
Mm.
other planets. And so one of the issues I think for me was she was shown a lot of things that matched scientific understanding of her day.
Okay.
God showed her what a science book would have shown her,
I see.
but the science books were wrong.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
um, the reason Adventists are Sabbatarians are actually because of a sea captain named Joseph Bates.
Mm.
And he was this massive astronomy guy. But he was an influential man in the Northeast at the time. And because of the failed prophecies of the prior leader of the movement, they needed a jump start to bring people back in. And this
Yeah.
guy had a way with people. And so they wanted to win over Joseph Bates. And so Ellen and her husband go to visit Joseph Bates at his house. And she falls into vision while at Joseph's house
Mm.
and says that she's been whisked off to a planet with rings
Wow.
and 7 moons. And so she's describing Saturn.
Okay.
And then she describes Jupiter. She doesn't say them by name,
Okay.
but she's the giant planet with rings. And I forget how she describes Jupiter, lets you know it's Jupiter. But she says that they have the number of moons that
Mm.
we were aware of them having
Okay.
at the time. In fact, we found like 4
Mm.
or 5 more moons of Saturn 2 weeks after she has this vision. Like,
Wow.
they're published. The finding is
Wow.
published 2 weeks later. So if she
Okay.
goes to his house 2 weeks later, she's not going to be up to date. Now
Yeah.
she's off by 90 something moons.
Mm.
Like there's 90 something, I mean, which is fine. But it's like
Sure.
there's little
Give or take
things
that.
like that where God
Mm.
showed her, and because the argument is if God had shown her how many moons Saturn really had,
Mm-hmm.
and she told Joseph how many moons Saturn really had, he would have said she was wrong because he knew how
Oh,
many we had discovered already. So God showed
oh,
her what he needed to show her to convince him,
okay,
not the truth. So then you get into
okay.
this thing where God's inspiration's not always true.
Mm-hmm.
It's what it needs to be in the
Wow.
moment,
Okay.
which an Adventist would never say about any part of the Bible. So
Yeah, I see.
we're changing
Huh.
things to keep her. Like it
Mm,
was those little things I started to notice. Now,
mm,
later I found out some things she said about slavery,
mm.
which she is it's the mid 1800s. I'm not holding her to an
Sure.
impossible standard. But like there's a quote where she speaks of slaves that were never taught to read
Mm,
and were never allowed to go to church. They would never have found out about God, and die as slaves on the plantation. God can't take them to heaven
mm.
because they never repented and accepted him. But they also were never told they needed to. So he can't punish them in hell. So
Mm.
he will just make it as though they never existed and
Okay.
he won't punish them or raise them from death. He'll just
Mm.
forget about them. Now, I don't see how that's any different than eternal separation.
Mm. Yeah,
But
yeah.
it was this idea that for her, God couldn't find a reason to save a slave that hadn't
Mm.
been taught like there was no, well,
Yeah.
they don't know, so I'm not going to hold against them what they don't
Right.
know. It was, well, oh, well,
Yeah, I see.
but she also analyzed what God would do to children that
Mm.
hadn't accepted or had. And
Okay.
she was unwilling to say God would forget about children that were too young to make that choice.
Fascinating.
But she was comfortable saying he would forget slaves who were never given the choice.
Mm.
And like those little things to me, if God's speaking to you directly, he's not
Yeah.
going to speak to you according to your culture and
Mm.
time. He's going to tell
Yeah.
you, if he's telling you the truth, he's telling you the truth.
Yeah.
Not, I would tell you more, but y'all aren't ready for it yet. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable with that
Mm.
image of God. And
Mm.
I think that was ultimately the deal with Adventism, was to keep all the things we believe, regardless of what they are,
Yeah.
paints a very specific image
Mm.
of the most loving thing in the universe.
Mm.
And if I can come up with someone more loving than that thing in
Yeah.
my family,
Ooh. Yeah.
then something is off.
Mm.
Like
Jeez.
that was really it was the simple
Mm.
idea of my mom wouldn't do that.
Jeez. Yeah.
Like, and if my mom wouldn't do it, I assume God's more loving than my mom. And now that's hard.
Yeah.
Don't get
Yeah.
me wrong, my mom is the
Yeah.
best,
Yeah.
but she's still a flawed human lady.
Sure.
But it was that kind of thing. It was watching my kids not do what I
Mm.
wanted them to do
Mm.
and be like, well, you're your own person. Like, I get you didn't
Mm.
want to do that. It was the idea of like, I should eternally shut you off from me because
Yeah.
you're not listening to me,
Yeah.
is so foreign to me as a concept.
Mm-hmm.
And so why I refuse to believe it is my fallen nature that makes me sympathetic.
Yeah. Yeah.
That doesn't, like, that never jived for me.
Yeah.
And so I had too many questions no one wanted
Ooh.
to answer. No one wanted
Mm.
to even talk about.
Mm. Mm.
And it was always, go look it up. Go find
Yeah. Yeah.
someone's written about it. And I did. I read doctoral thesis and master's
Mm.
theses from Andrews University and Oakwood
Mm.
University and Southern, Loma Linda, and all of the big Adventist places. But it's
Mm.
like you were saying in the Revelation podcast. If you spend 50,000 hours studying the
Yeah.
flat Earth,
Yeah.
you didn't flatten the Earth. You just
Right.
learned a whole lot about that. And
Congratulations.
yeah, like congratulations. You know a lot of not facts
Yeah.
that you have warped into this thing you now live in. And everyone else is wrong somehow, you know? And for us, it's like, for me, let me not speak for all Adventists. For my experience was, and again, to get back to the Matrix concept, right?
Yeah.
All good sounding spiritual things that didn't perfectly jive with us was the girl in the red dress. It was a thing to make you look, so that when you looked back, gun in your face. That's the devil tricking you.
Wow.
And so
Goodness.
we're such a shut off community in terms of the information we'll let in our brains. Like, we're going to read Adventist authors. We're going to watch Adventist programming. You know, 3ABN, the Word Network, all that. Like, we're watching that. Every single Adventist church on the planet Earth gets the same lesson. Every 13 weeks, here's what we're all learning. And it's all written by high up Adventists with very specific theology. It's the Sabbath school lesson is full blown indoctrination. Like, it's not. It is not really a Bible study. It is. This is how we look at these things. Yeah. And it's the way it's taught, honestly, is, which I didn't notice as a kid or as an adult, really. But it is, and it's not phrased this way, but an issue will be raised, and here's an interpretation. Now, they won't tell you this is what Martin Luther thought, or this is what the Nazarenes think, or, you know, it was, here's an idea. Here's why this idea is wrong. Okay. Here's an idea. Here's why it's wrong. Here's our idea. Here's a verse or two that says it's right. Here's a quote from Ellen that backs that up. And what you're learning is every other way to look at almost everything. Yeah. We're going to tell you why it's wrong. We're going to tell you why it's dangerous to be open to the idea that the creation week isn't literal. Yeah. Isn't 6,000 years ago. You know, and so, like, you have this requirement not to accept indisputable evidence. Yeah. Like, a thing I've been agonizing over, well, not agonizing over, I just think about it a lot, is Andromeda, the galaxy. Yeah. Who did it? Hubble. Edwin Hubble turns his telescope at Andromeda and notices this is not a small glob of gas. This is a large collection of individual stars. This is an entirely new galaxy that we did not know there were other ones. Ellen White's dead by the time that happens. Like, all the things we believe are kind of locked in stone already, right? We hadn't found, there'd been like 3 dinosaur fossils found before the doctrine was set in stone. And we didn't know how to carbon date them. We didn't know, we didn't know all of these things. But Andromeda is 2.5 billion light years away. It was placed there as a sign for times and seasons 6,000 years ago. Ah, okay. But it's 2.5 billion light years away. And so anytime I think of Andromeda or I see Andromeda, I'm like, we shouldn't see that for 2.5 billion years.
Mm.
And there it is. You can see it,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know, and that leads me down these weird things of like Alpha Centauri, the closest
Mm.
star to us,
Mm.
4 light years away. So when God says, I'm going to make this star, Adam and Eve don't see it for 4 years.
Mm.
They don't see more than a dozen for 10 years. It's like 10,000 stars, I think, by 100 years.
Mm.
So this like system we have where we look up and we're like, that just was there. It couldn't have
Mm-hmm.
been, but we have to believe that it was, and that there were
Mm.
4 evenings
Mm.
and mornings before there was a
Mm-hmm.
sun to rise
Mm.
and set. Like
Yeah.
we're just not supposed to ask those questions. It's
Mm.
just don't worry about how he did it. He did it. It all makes sense, and it's please don't use the um, the gifts God has given mankind
Mm.
to understand what this consciousness is. Because everything you see is a test of your faith. Do you believe or
Mm.
not? God put
Mm.
those stars too far away to make sure you believe he could put them too far away.
Well, okay.
And by knowing how far away they are and thinking it has to follow physics, you're doubting God. You no longer believe that God is real if you
Mm.
don't believe the story happened the way we tell you the story. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
it's either
I
or.
see.
You're a believer or you are not.
Mm.
Uh, and that's just a lot to carry for people. That
Mm.
again, it's like banging your head against the wall for a flat Earth,
Yeah.
ignoring everything else. It's just like I don't know what to tell you. It has to be flat. Every scientist, everyone's lying. God, the
Mm.
devil is teaching them to lie for some reason that we don't understand, And so everybody around you is potentially an agent.
Well,
Like that's the world I was in. Of
they must they
Go
must have
ahead.
loved you in Sunday school, Will,
Oh my gosh.
for thinking about these things. I mean, I'm all of it so fascinating. Everything from the way that the stars themselves then for like a protest to your faith, like a test of faith, and all that. Like when you think in those terms, and I'm fascinated by like the spirit of prophecy text is very familiar to me just because of my study of Revelation, but not from any other direction. I mean, like my friend Robbie Waddell, friend and former professor, does a lot of done a lot of work on the spirit in Revelation. But this way in general that because I feel like it's going to be recognizable for so many of us, like in Pentecostalism, um, the idea of being a very insular people. Then you have a tradition; you only read within the tradition. The more I learn, the more I see how across traditions how common it is that people find a way to find their own story. I mean, like early Pentecostals had a narration of very much like with the church ages and several references put together, but this notion of basically like God moved on the early church, then God went silent, and there's no valid Christianity until somewhat Luther, somewhat Wesley, and then us. But there are ways of seeing that in the text, and like
Mm-hmm.
then the way that story is fleshed out. I mean, it's just gosh, I'm just seeing the way that then like it just how comparable these things are, even though the other things about the system are so different. That's
Well,
wild to me.
that was one of the most revealing things because it was always sort of the unspoken idea that no one else was reading these scriptures. No
Yeah,
one else had a real good idea of what Revelation meant.
yeah.
And I didn't realize until later that there were a lot of people that were reading a lot of Daniel and Revelation almost
Hmm.
exactly like we were.
Yeah,
It's just you take a left at this verse or right here,
right.
and because something happened in that group of people's journey that said that we're being led spiritually this way.
Yeah.
And I think the more high demand your system is,
Mm.
uh, you need those beliefs in a powerful character,
Yeah.
because someone has to say the reason our left turn is better than their right turn
Mm.
is because, someone was in a trance for 10 hours holding a Bible. Like, it can't just be their opinion. It's
Right.
God has to have come out of somewhere and said, this is the path.
Yeah.
Or otherwise, you could just take a different one. You could just,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know that this is the right interpretation. These people, but there's a lot of people that started off on the same path, and we're all, this right here. But those are the revelations of the path people are going through.
Yeah.
It's like how the first commandment, is it the first commandment? Is to have no other gods before me.
Yeah.
Um, that commandment in and of itself suggests that there are other gods,
Mm.
but we end up a monotheistic faith, right? But the whole of text isn't monotheistic.
Mm.
It's I forget the word for, we prefer this one, but this isn't the only one. Like those are little clues. And so when I look at the text now, I see these arguments of people through time who are saying
Yeah.
this is our idea of what put us here, what
Mm-hmm.
made this, who started this experiment,
Mm-hmm.
and what is that thing like?
Mm.
What does that thing like? And it's been a chiseling, the slab, and we're chiseling. We're not. This is a process. We are getting to the picture, right? And so the picture from the text is supposed to end with Jesus. Jesus is the revelation, right?
Mm.
Um, the image that was Jesus. That's where I was going.
Yeah.
Because I didn't put the button on it earlier.
Mm.
My point in bringing up that John talks about the testimony of Jesus more, but they ignore that and go to Paul,
Yeah.
is that, to me, John clearly defines what he's talking about in 1 John 5, in 1 John 1. He talks about, we are the witnesses. We have the story of Jesus.
Mm.
And he
Mm.
ultimately says the testimony is that believing in Jesus is eternal life.
Mm-hmm.
So he's basically pointing back to John 3:16.
Yeah.
Like the testimony of Jesus being the spirit of prophecy, to me now
Mm.
means all that prophecy has ever been trying to do
Mm.
and what Jesus did is the same thing.
Mm. Yeah.
Prophecy is trying to show you a character, lead you to a character, and Jesus is that character, has
Mm.
that character.
Mm-hmm.
And we have said, no, the testimony of Jesus is
Mm.
whatever Ellen White said.
I see.
And that became a blasphemous idea in my mind.
Mm.
That to hold the way we're reading that is blasphemous.
Wow.
For me. Just for me.
Yeah.
Other people can believe how they believe, but for me, I couldn't keep that. Like,
And
swapping that out is
I see. Yeah.
blasphemous to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I see. Um, I really, I want to make sure I ask you this, Will, because I feel like, even in terms of like the thing that sets it apart being the Sabbath observance and the understanding that being so significant. I mean, like, I know if I, as an outsider to that tradition, as would be with other people engaging with Pentecostalism or whatever, the idea typically is you want to try to interact charitably with the tradition, with the best tradition, not the worst, etc. So, like, if I feel like other people, like from my world, I've heard people say before, like, boy, for those of us that don't have some kind of a Sabbath practice, the fact that this tradition has such a strong Sabbath emphasis is really beautiful. because that, in terms of like that, that's sort of a gift that the tradition brings. Are you at a place now like where do you ever, whether it's a Sabbath or anything else, do you think of these things as gifts, or is it more like it felt like it became so legalistic and the system so rigid and all that it's hard to find gifts within the tradition at this point?
There was a period it was hard to find value still. I think the rhythm of Sabbath is beautiful.
Hmm.
I always did, honestly. Like the Sabbath was
Hmm.
not a problem for me. The summer Sabbaths were tough because the sun wouldn't set till
Hmm.
like 9:30.
Oh yeah, sure.
Uh, and you're like, it's the NBA Finals. Can we
Yeah,
come on,
yeah,
son? You know. So
yeah.
there were like little things like that. But the the idea that there was a day I didn't have to do anything, that
Hmm.
didn't want to do. You know, I didn't have to be
Hmm.
productive. I
Yeah.
didn't have to answer the emails, or I did not have to do anything. I could
Hmm.
take that time is wonderful. It's the weight of being perfectly Christ-like for 24 hours in a
Hmm.
way, in an elevated way you weren't trying to the other six.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
because that becomes its own thing. Like
Hmm.
the more you attempt to live by the way Sunday through Friday,
Hmm.
the more elevated your Saturday has to be,
Yeah.
because it still has to be special. You know, it's like there was
Hmm.
this. You're never keeping it good enough,
Hmm.
and without that being the thing God's going to kill me for,
Yeah.
but uh, just a good idea to not rip and run 24/7. It's
Hmm.
it's a gift again. You know,
Hmm.
my Saturdays are soccer days. You know, that's
Hmm.
when Caitlin's games are. But um, I'm outside, like, like that whole like rhythm of
Hmm.
going outside, being in
Yeah.
nature, all of that. I
Yeah.
enjoy it. It's just it's putting eternal damnation on the other
Ooh.
side of it that became, like that's just it's an anchor around your neck. You
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
enjoy something that if you slip up a little or forget,
Right.
um, you know, and it's like there was always we were on top of each other
Hmm.
at on Sabbaths. Like, you're not. Oh, are you guys talking about the game last night? Y'all shouldn't be doing that. Like, this is not the
Hmm.
time. Like, it was
Yeah.
uh, very structured, um, and that can take a lot of joy out of things. But I actually think it's really important for people to do that. I don't think you don't need to tie anything eternal to it.
A lot of
But
things are great until you have add an or else to it.
yeah,
Falling in love
it's
is
the
great unless it's like until it becomes like fall in love with me or else
or
I will slow
else.
roast you forever. There's a lot of things that like are
Yeah.
great until you kind of had that level of threat. Do you because so much of what you do now, and even when you talked about how the question you get most on the other side being like what is truth to you now? What do you kind of replace this with? Because one of the things I find so interesting about this stuff that you're doing, because you're a prolific TikToker and you're a savvy interpreter of culture, and it's fun. There's a lot of stuff that's there, but you do the Seventh-Day Adventist stuff a lot. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of riffing and thinking about that. Since you've been in a different place now for as long as you have, why do you think that comes up as often as it does? What is it either that you feel like you're trying to work out for yourself or like for other people? And are there a lot of folks within those communities that are engaging that content, or do they tend to leave it alone precisely because it is outside the box? Just let them know like what all of that means to you now and why you find yourself still thinking about it at all, much less addressing it in public ways.
Um, I find, and maybe it's just me, but I find Adventists peculiarly, can't say that word, um, don't seek out former Adventists to see what they're saying. Like, um, I I have a bunch of former Latter-day Saint friends
Mm-hmm.
through TikTok and Jehovah's Witnesses, and like their interaction with people still in their churches is exponentially higher than mine.
Interesting.
I
Okay.
interact with a lot of people that were Adventists,
Okay.
um, but not many that are. And the ones that
Mm.
are, it's usually direct messages. It's not an
Okay.
open comment. They're
Yeah.
not interested in a dialogue with everyone. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I want to reach out to you
Mm.
because I think there is a sense through what I talk about that I know what I'm talking about.
Mm.
And so there is a like, well, he knows the truth.
Mm.
He's just struggling believing it. And
Okay.
so I
Okay.
think most of the time when I get that question, they really want me to say I haven't found it and to like let
Uh,
them know y'all
mm.
still have it. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
haven't found the new thing.
Mm.
Um, and the conversations never go far because my response is, why do you think someone would have to have it?
Mm.
And it's like, well, you don't want to answer the question. I'm like, well, I am answering your question because I'm addressing the assumption that if there is one singular capital T truth,
Yeah.
someone would have to have it. And like,
Mm.
why do you believe that? Like, why do you assume
Mm-hmm.
we could cobble it together? Any one person
Mm-hmm.
could come up with all universal truth, you know?
Yeah.
Like, why is that a thing you think we need? Because not everyone thinks we need that.
Mm.
It's some denominations are in that space. And my goal a lot of times is to reveal, um, help people see the assumptions they don't know they're carrying.
Yeah.
Not to make them not believe them, but so that they know that they're there, so that they can choose to believe in them or not. Like, you need to know, because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know. Like, there was so
Yeah.
much that I was like, this is true, this is true, this is true. But in reality, it was making this assumption here.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm making this one assumption here, I have to believe all these other things.
Yeah.
And if this assumption's not true, I don't lose all these beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't work together the way
I see.
they used to. Like, that's the thing with creationism, is the head of the churches now are like, if you don't believe in the 1 week, then there is no literal Sabbath because there would not have been an actual seventh day. So
Oh.
then Sabbath could be any day you wanted it to be. It could be any
Mm-hmm.
of the 7 days. So like, we would have
Mm.
no, why would God have a reason to
Mm.
raise a church focused on a Sabbath central message at the end time
Mm.
if that wasn't literal? But
Yeah.
what they're saying is, if that week's not literal, we have no reason to exist as a church.
Mm.
But at the same time can say, in some verses, uh, God tells, is it Nehemiah or Ezra, to lay on his side for 40 days to represent 40 years and to then roll over for 300 and whatever it is. And it's like, well, if God can take a period of time and say, I want you to think about this
Yeah.
like it's a day,
Yeah.
then he can tell a story about a creation thing that takes seven, like, you can do whatever you want. And
Yeah.
then say, look, you got 7 days. I want you to spend one of these days kicking it with me.
Mm.
That didn't have to be tied to anything other than
Right.
he said to.
Yeah.
But Adventism is saying, no, it does. It has to be.
Mm.
It's like they're making these extra assumptions that don't need to be there, that are good for people to just see them. And for me, I had nobody deconstructing or asking questions or talking about Adventism when I was.
Hmm.
And I couldn't really find literature on it.
Hmm.
And so I'm trying to see my experience through Rachel Held Evans. I'm
Yeah.
trying to see my experience through Shipwrecked. I'm
Hmm.
trying to see my specific experience through other people's paths.
Yeah.
And it was okay, but it was never all the way my story.
Hmm.
And so once we were stuck in the house over
Hmm.
the pandemic,
Yeah.
and people were talking about this app with kids dancing and having a good time. I hopped on there, and there was a girl, person, and they said, they were like, "There's a lot of former Mormons. There's a lot of former Jehovah's Witnesses. Where are the Adventists?
Wow.
I know we are out here.
Huh.
No one's making content. Where are we?"
Huh.
And so then I was like, "Oh, it's not that I couldn't find it because
Hmm.
I wasn't looking in the right places.
Yeah.
There's a Reddit thread,
Hmm.
and like so I started making things so that there would be something. If someone was
Yeah.
like, "I'm asking this question," well, more than
Hmm.
likely I've already asked it.
Wow.
I've already thought about it. I've already put a ton of time into it,
Hmm.
and looked at what Ellen said, and looked at what the church has said, and looked what non-Adventist biblical scholars talk about, and I have an opinion on it. And so I'm like, well, why wouldn't I share that? Why? It
Hmm.
would be insane for me to have gone through this experience alone,
Yeah.
wishing I didn't
Yeah.
have the capacity, have the ability, and not do it.
Yeah.
And so it's just been that. It's whatever gets stuck in my craw or whatever.
Hmm.
Like right now, I've been working on something, this matrix idea, for a while, but it's already, before we started, I had, how Microsoft Word can read for you, like read to you.
Yeah.
It's already like 20 minutes. So I don't know what to do
Hmm.
with it, but it has to get made. I know that. I know
Hmm.
I have to, it has to
Yeah.
exist
Yeah.
because it's a perspective that's going to be valid and valuable for someone. I don't know who that person is, and I'll
Yeah.
never see them
Yeah.
or talk to them,
Hmm.
but it has to get made,
Hmm.
And I hate that a little bit because
Hmm.
my family is not a huge fan of it.
I
They just
guess
ignore
not.
it.
Hmm.
Like my
Okay. So
parents,
they do ignore it. Okay.
yeah, they're not on TikTok really.
Hmm.
And so we've kind of made their Facebook people.
Hmm.
And so if I don't put things there,
Okay.
then they're like, process however you want to process. But we have too many, there's too many friends. They don't want to have to deal with
Right. Sure.
all the questions, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is kind of frustrating because I
Hmm.
would love to have those conversations
Yeah.
because I have a
Yeah.
ton of friends from like nothing. I'm not one of those people that left and got like shunned.
Hmm. Okay. That's
Like
interesting.
nobody cared, honestly,
Hmm.
that I left.
Wow.
And I don't mean that.
Interesting.
I don't mean nobody cared like nobody missed me.
Hmm.
I mean, it was as though they weren't worried about me at all.
Hmm.
And I know for some of them it was, well, it's the truth. He'll come back eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And other people, like for my parents specifically, it's like, we've been witness to your character too much
Uh,
to think like you've fallen off some deep end. Like wherever,
that's
like they
interesting.
are like, wherever you're going, we believe you're being led.
Hmm.
And wherever that takes you is fine.
Even if they don't look too close,
And they don't
there's a
want to look.
essential,
They don't want to
but
look.
there's a trust in you.
Yes, yes. And now what they have said is they would love it if I stopped making things because the internet is forever
Yeah.
and I won't be able to take you can't take something back, is kind of their thing. So I know that there's that little, you might change your mind later deal, which is fine if that's what they need to hold on to. Because I do think that if I was hurting my parents, I wouldn't be doing it. I mean, it just is what it is. So I'm glad that we've made this compromise because I need to do it.
Yeah.
But it would have been a lot harder. And I think that they know that. I think that's why they stay away from it, because they're like, I'm going to say things that are going to make them very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then when we are together, it just never comes up. We absolutely do not talk about it whatsoever.
Fair enough.
So yeah, I don't know. But again, I would love to, because I'm not hostile to it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You don't seem that way.
I'm not. I was. I mean, I had an angry phase. But it's more of everyone's getting through what they're getting through, how they're getting through it.
Yeah.
And if your view of this helps you,
yeah,
I'm all for that. It's when your views have to be projected on other people in a way that infringes on their ability to enjoy their conscious experience, that things become an issue. And that's not really a problem for my closer Adventist friends, So it's been, my breakup with it has been relatively seamless in terms of people. It was, hard in and of itself, but I've been very fortunate in how it worked. And that Deanna and I went through it together. Like, that was a huge fear, was I've effectively talked this person into this belief system. And now I need to maybe talk them out, and I didn't even know how to tell her I was having doubts or questions, or starting to think that maybe the founding wasn't exactly the story we were told. It was a little bit more human than previously believed. And I thought that could be the end of our marriage, and then come to find out that she was asking the same questions, and she was in the same, like, I'm not sure I believe this. I'm not sure I believe that either. Or we got into a thing with my parents about the purpose of the church. And she and my dad were talking, and she said the purpose of the church was to bring people to the image of Jesus. And he said he didn't say it like this, but it was to convert other Christians to Adventists. Like, it wasn't save the lost.
I see. Wow.
It was to fix Christians.
Okay.
And I remember sitting there hearing it and being like, that's the Adventist answer. But it feels really wrong. Like, it feels incorrect, and it was one of those things where I'd heard it a million times and it had never bothered me before. Yeah. And then I was like, ooh, I don't know. And I could see on her face, she was shocked that was the phrasing of it. Wow. And I think that was what gave me the courage to say something to her. Interesting. And so luckily we have done all of this in lockstep, which has been great. And then our kids are just the most interesting pair of children. Yeah. Caitlin, there's no way she could have been an Adventist. I mean, there's absolutely no way she could have done it. Like, there's too much she'd have to disbelieve that she was already, like, set on early. And she's our, like, I'm gonna say the inappropriate thing in front of grandma and
Yeah,
grandpa. Like
I see.
we're talking about
Uh,
how insane the 6,000-year-old planet is. You know, like she's there's no tact to it. Like she's like, no,
I
no, no.
see. Yeah, yeah. That's
You know, and I'm like, sweetheart, please, like,
mm,
just don't do
mm,
it. Don't do it today. But yeah, man, it's been interesting. It continues to be interesting, um, because I don't know. I don't know how you walk off. I mean, like your roots are your roots. Like you can't,
absolutely. That's
they
right.
don't go
It's
away.
in you. Sure.
And so it's like it
Mm,
is a thing I'm not in agreement with, but it's also it's the language I speak.
yeah.
Um, it's it's a worldview. It's not mine,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a
Mm-hmm.
way I can vision things. I know how to do that. I know how to,
Yeah.
you know, walk those paths. So it's always going to be something to me,
Sure.
you know, as much as my understanding of divinity evolves and changes,
Mm,
progresses, which I think is wonderful. I think it's wonderful to
mm.
not have the answer,
Yeah. Yeah.
to
I hear that.
to be open to all of the mystery. You know, that
Yes.
you don't have to close anything off because all of it can be valuable and useful. All
Mm,
the different ways of turning the gem are beautiful, you know.
mm,
And like the my appreciation for scripture, in my opinion, has grown quite a
mm.
bit because I'm not
That's
memorizing
interesting.
it. I'm not.
Mm,
It is not. It's not a tool anymore. It is a. It's like Play-Doh, you know. Like
mm. Wow.
it's like it's blank. It's not a blank canvas, but it is like it can be something different every time,
Wow.
you know. And while that is unsettling to the
Mm.
Adventist baby in me, it is the most beautiful
Mm.
thing in the world to be open, to
Yeah.
just be open,
Yeah.
you know.
I love that. I love that image of scripture as Plato and the idea that maybe it's where it's more native to that world really is play and being able to play with text and images. And I think with the Hebrew Bible, we get that so much.
Yeah,
There's a sense of play and um, I want to be conscious of your time, but it was lovely. Maybe this is a good place to land. It was lovely to me that even as you sort of naturally dovetail talking about you and Deanna, who of course we love being on this journey together, and now your kids don't have the baggage this way. Because one of the things I thought was most profound that you said, and I feel like would ring true for a lot of people coming from all kinds of spaces. It's like, I mean, there are these particular arguments that you came to see differently and investigate in terms of like, the writings of the prophet and all of like it, and then what do we do with some of the details that are off? But I thought it was so haunting because I think this is again just true for so many of us. This sense of like, as a dad now and as a human being, since this story is ostensibly about a God of love who loves everybody and unconditionally and all these things, there is no way that I can be nicer and people around me can be nicer and more loving than that being, and any of this makes sense. But I love that it was like it was in some ways nothing more complicated than the clarity of my real relationships with people. It's like, yeah, no, that just cannot be. And I feel like that's true for a lot of folks. This notion that what first breaks us open. Interesting too, because Jesus so regularly draws analogies between human relationships and how we relate to God. Jesus is the one doing that. That oh, God is like, and we get the prodigal father and all these things, but just the notion that if we're living awake and attentive to the relationships that we're flourishing in around us, that is how the divine speaks. And that is a thing to be taken seriously when there's no way we can square that with these stories about God.
yeah, yeah. And I feel like that is the wrestling everyone's been doing forever.
Yeah.
It's that
Yeah.
this is my idea until I run into that wall where this idea doesn't work anymore. Like
Yeah.
this no
Yeah.
longer rings true about the thing I feel.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's that part. It's like you have these experiences, as infrequent as they may be,
Mm.
but there is a feeling attached to them where you're like, that feeling does not match this concept.
Yeah.
Like the thing I know to be true can't do that.
Mm.
It can't. And so that must be about something else,
Yeah.
like I don't want to drag out another thing, but um, one of the weird swaps I had was the story of David taking a census,
Yeah.
and how that's like in the Chronicles, it's the first time Satan shows up.
Mm-hmm.
But then in Samuel King's, the actor that causes David to take that census is God himself. He
Mm-hmm.
says
Mm-hmm.
God makes him take the census, then he sends
Yeah.
an angel to kill 70,000 people for
Yeah.
taking the census. And I forget who it was that I was reading that was talking about this is an interesting thing where the first time you have the story, God does something.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's as though they decided that didn't make sense for God
Mm-hmm.
to do that. So the accuser does it in the retelling
Mm.
of the story. But then at the end of both stories, you have 70,000 people that got killed by the angel of the Lord,
Wow.
right? And so I'm like, that's still not good. Like, whoever caused it's still
Uh-huh.
not good. But
Mm.
when I choose to look at these stories as, oh, okay, well, here's a group of people trying to determine how God interacts with them. And the
Mm-hmm.
way they're telling that story is through the metaphor of the lives of their kings. So
Mm.
their kings are bad kings when they're letting the people do bad things.
Yeah.
And so the punishment of these bad kings is really just it's how they're talking about their collective. Like
Mm.
we
Mm.
are our bad king.
Mm.
And because we are our bad king, we think these things were happening. But they're just trying to figure it out. It's we're in this thing. Why are we in this
Yeah.
mess? How does God react to it? How does God relate to us? And they're asking the question over and over and over again.
Mm.
And instead of taking their asking and saying,
Mm.
see, they're done. They were done. You know, let's figure out what they figured out. Let's do that. Yes.
Yeah.
But keep asking.
Yeah.
Like their story evolved. It
Mm-hmm.
progressed.
Mm-hmm.
Why would that stop? Like the
Mm.
progression of the idea
Yeah.
just from common sense would seem to grow as
Mm.
we developed our own understanding, as they had developed their own understanding. And to ever be satisfied with your spot and certainty in all of it is it's almost backwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like why would we stop that pursuit? Why would we think that pursuit has stopped? And like those are things that are open to me now that were not open
Mm.
to me,
Mm.
that are open to my kids that weren't
Yeah.
open to me. And so they're the wholeness with which they can be loved by
Mm.
the universe
Mm.
is a much wider berth than
Mm.
mine. And so like I was
Mm.
saying, that trimming of the fat I did to
Yeah.
be loved,
Mm-hmm.
they can know they're loved
Mm.
without trimming anything
Yeah.
and then grow into themselves
Yeah.
instead of seeing this stuff as negative and bad and whatever. It's
Mm.
this is I'm the only person that gets to be this reflection of this thing.
Yeah.
Why am I turning half of me off?
Mm.
You know, like I'm robbing myself, the world, everyone of this particular expression of this thing
Mm.
that gets to be here. That's insane.
Yeah.
I've got better things to do with this particular time, this gift, this one time I get to do this.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm going to do it well,
Mm.
and doing it well looks
Mm.
different than it used to,
Mm.
but the pursuit's the same.
Yeah.
Pursuit's
How
always the same.
lovely. How lovely that you get to the way you're able to think now about how the those questions in scripture and that story is still moving forward. The God of the Exodus is still on the move, and we're still active participants in these stories and how we find meaning as we go. But then specifically connecting that to the way your kids, now the story you're passing down to your kids and the new stories that they're living being wider, because there's something really wonderful about that. You know, it's like you're both the way you're finding your story in the larger story. So now their stories get to be even more open, and like they have more room, not less. Like what a great way to what a great version of passing on a faith. You know, it's
Mm.
like something roomier than what you were given, and maybe that's in a way what we're all doing. You know, it's kind of like carving out space so that someone else can have more space than we had. You know,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. That
mm,
what better tradition can we leave than that?
mm.
You know. So
Well, I
uh,
love that, Will, and I feel like people are going to have more room from this conversation. I do, and boy, the idea that you're driven to keep talking about this stuff in ways that like because you're aware, that's really powerful to me, and it's really powerful to Stella apparently right now too. That like, but the notion that another young Will is coming along, but they may not be listening now, they may not pay attention now, but somebody's going to ask this same question, and I gotta have something for them. I think there's something about that that's like very powerful to me. You know, this notion of and how healing I feel like that can be. You know, that you can't quite get in the time machine and go back to the younger you and do it, but in a way you kind of can, and it's like that's
yeah. No, yeah,
mm,
yeah, yeah. It is healing me to do that. You know,
yeah.
in and of itself, and it will keep doing that, and it's always going to be a special thing for me to talk about because it's been such a huge part of my journey. But
So
I don't.
people need to find your TikTok for sure. So
Yeah,
TikTok, what's the handle?
will.i.jam. It's like the
Mm,
Black Eyed Pea, but jam instead of am.
mm,
And it's funny because again, you never know who's seeing things, right? And
yeah.
I'll be real quick. D got on like a list, a group, and there was a bunch of people that ended up being former Adventists because it's a group for people from high demand religions that are trying to
Oh,
figure out what to do with their kids now that they
okay.
are out of them. And
Yeah.
so my wife was like, "Well, my husband makes TikToks about Adventism. You might look him up," and put my name in, and all of them already knew. They're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, we already follow that guy.
Wow.
We already know
Wow.
all about that." And so I was like, "Oh, like
Mm,
people are aware, you know."
yeah.
Um, and so I don't know what that makes me feel,
Mm,
but it's positive. Like it, you know,
yeah. Yeah.
I know that there is a value
Yes.
to people of what
Yes.
I'm doing, you
Yeah.
know, and to just any one singular person that can be like, I felt that before
Yeah.
is worth it. It's just absolutely worth it. So yeah.
It's cool. It's cool too because I feel like some of the things that you shared, even in this conversation, that are like very particular to the tradition. I
Mm-hmm.
found myself thinking were like some of the things that most spoke to me in terms of like, wow, that is very specific, and also just like it's so weird that idea of like the it truly is like it's almost the more personal you go, the more universal it gets. Is that like it's like you're telling these
Yeah.
very particular things. It's like, well, that seems niche, and they'll be like, well, it might be a niche, but there are a lot more people inside this niche who are making sense of it in their own kind of getting jailbroken from something somewhere.
Yeah. Like it's your specific thing will speak to a broader group of people
Yeah,
than you ever can imagine that it would.
Yeah.
And that's funny because you try to, me personally, tried not to be that
Right.
specific and on the nose at first. Because I'm like, who's going to know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I started making longer stuff that was in the weeds, that was when people started reacting to things that were like,
Mm.
I don't know what you're talking about, but this reminds me of this. Or my
Yeah.
church did that exact same thing for an entirely different reason. I had no idea other people did that, or I had no idea that other people read that verse, or
Mm.
called themselves the peculiar people, or the
Yeah.
remnant of her seed, or
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you end up realizing a lot of people have picked these same labels and
Yeah.
found ways, and so you have so much
Mm.
in common
Yeah.
with these people that were like, they believe this crazy stuff over here,
Mm.
and it's like, no, they don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
believe almost exactly what you believe, just twist this one thing a little bit.
I thought I was the remnant of her seed. That's great.
So yeah, it's cool. It's cool to see
Mm.
uh, the size of the pool is bigger
Yeah.
than you thought, and there's other people in there that are like, I don't know what you're talking about, but I get it. I get it, and
Yep.
uh, all that's helpful to see
It
other
is.
people's angles.
It
I
is.
want to know what you thought. I want to know what you
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
I love all of those opinions that I used to have to ignore, that I get to
Yeah.
play with. Uh,
Mm.
so yeah, I don't know. It's always fun to find a healthy spot after a while. To,
Yeah.
for anyone going through stuff, it's uncomfortable for a bit,
Mm-hmm.
but then there's like this really cool, wide open space after.
Yeah, man, I so feel it, and again, I'm trying to. Yeah, I've always, me, always trying to land the plane. But it's like with the spirits move, it's such a like it just feels so like, yeah, it's like, because I feel that way. I feel like I feel it in my voice now and the stuff that I'm doing, and I know it's different in that way from anything I've done before. Is that there's no angst. There's just not. And I'm not saying I'm never conflicted. You know what I mean? Not really. No, I really more like, no, I'm good. I'm happy. Like, really, and I feel like I'm. It doesn't mean there's not still stuff that you're figuring out, but I feel like I'm at a good place, and I think it's to be able to create from that place, and to create not necessarily having this great agenda for where it's going to go. Just more like, I know I have to do this. Hopefully, it finds somebody, and you trust that the work will make room for itself. But I think doing that from that place of like ease, even though I think obviously it was important also for you to say some of those things through the angst. But I love that even the encouragement you just gave to people, that you do hit that place where it's not quite as like, doesn't have hooks in you the same way.
Yeah, yeah, and it takes a minute, but it's
Yeah.
like, it's like you just one day you're like, huh, I am not
Mm-hmm.
bothered by that particular thing
Yeah.
anymore, and
Yeah.
it just, there's a weight that kind of goes. Like I remember I posted something about it, but like the day I no longer had to keep finding flaws in Ellen,
Wow.
that there was like, you have tortured
Mm.
yourself enough with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you can just be. And
Yeah.
the everything since then, like, I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of stuff's gone political since then,
Yeah.
because the need to make the quick Adventist thing hasn't been there,
Uh-huh.
because there was a resolution a bit,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
which gives me time to actually now get even further in the weeds when I want to,
Mm.
because
Yeah.
I'm not
Wow.
getting tripped up on figuring the thing out anymore. It's like, oh, now I
Yeah.
can
Yeah. Yeah.
really get in there when I thought it
Mm.
was already. But now it's
Mm-hmm.
like, it's an even deeper thing. So I'm actually excited. I don't know why.
It's
I don't
great.
know what's exciting about talking about something you don't believe anymore. But but there is I don't know. It's it keeps giving. So
No, there's freedom to it, and it's like, I mean, I know because I don't mean to keep circling around as much as I do the big eschatological questions, the big questions of like judgment and afterlife and hell and all things. But they drove me for so much of my life, and it is interesting now. And some people won't be happy to hear this maybe, but like, if you put a gun to my head, if the plane's going down, like whatever, I have zero anxiety that I about like that, and that is a profound thing to be able to say. Like I do, that fear is not in me now. I don't, and the God, and I have faith, but the God I believe in is so not like that. There's not even like there's not a trace of it, and it's
Yeah.
so cool. I think to be able to acknowledge that, and then like you say, you're able to kind of now you can jam out new things from these sounds that you couldn't have before because the energy behind it is not the same. I think
Yeah.
that's really beautiful.
Yeah. Which just opens a new page for new people. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
uh,
Will, thank you for opening these pages for us. What a gift this conversation is, my friend, and what a gift you are to the world. I'm
oh,
so
thank you.
grateful for the time.
Thank you for having me on, man. It's a blast.
Stella also does not have any angst. Stella's also angst free.
Uh,
She's feeling good about God and the world. So appreciate you, my friend. We'll do this again soon.